Hello everyone, welcome to Nightmare Chronicles. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more chilling tales. Now get comfortable and relax. For the best experience, grab your headset.
When I first moved into the apartment, it felt like a dream come true. It was an old building, sure, but it had character. High ceilings, hardwood floors, and a view of the city that could take your breath away. I was lucky to find a place like this in such a good neighborhood, especially for the price. The landlord, Mr. Grayson, seemed eager to rent it out though. Almost too eager. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just happy to have a place of my own. The first couple of weeks were fine. The neighbors kept to themselves, and the building was quiet. It was perfect for me, a freelance writer who worked from home. I spent most of my days at the desk near the large window in the living room, typing away and occasionally gazing out at the city below. But then, things started to change. It began with little noises, footsteps in the hallway when no one was home, faint whispers in the middle of the night. At first, I chalked it up to the building being old. Creaks and groans were normal, I told myself. But soon the noises grew louder, and the sense of unease began to creep in. I started noticing cold spots in the apartment, especially in the hallway outside my bedroom. The air would suddenly drop several degrees, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. One night I was lying in bed when I heard it, a knock. Not at the front door, but inside the apartment, like someone was tapping on the walls. I sat up, heart racing, and listened. The knock came again, this time louder, closer. I jumped out of bed, grabbing the closest thing I could find for protection, a metal flashlight, and crept toward the sound. But there was no one there. The next morning I confronted Mr. Grayson. I told him about the noises, the cold spots, the knocking. He seemed uneasy, shifting in his chair as I spoke, but he didn't seem surprised. "It's an old building," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Sometimes it plays tricks on you." But I wasn't buying it. I pressed him for answers, and eventually he let something slip. There was an incident a few years back. Someone died in that apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. He wouldn't give me any details, but I knew there was more to the story. That night I did some research. After hours of searching, I found an old news article about a woman named Clara who had lived in my apartment. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and no one ever found out what happened to her. According to the article, the police had searched the entire building, but came up with nothing. The case went cold, and eventually it was forgotten, but I couldn't forget it. I became obsessed with Clara's story. I scoured every inch of the apartment, looking for clues. That's when I found the hidden door. It was behind a large mirror in the hallway. The mirror was heavy, and when I moved it, I saw an old, faded door frame. The door was locked, but I could see the outline of a keyhole. I had never noticed it before, and now it seemed to be staring back at me, almost taunting me. I tried every key I had, but none of them fit. I needed to know what was behind that door, but something inside me warned against it. That night the knocking returned. It was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to come from every corner of the apartment. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, whispering. Faint, almost unintelligible, but definitely a voice. My pulse quickened. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate, pleading. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't alone. The room felt colder than ever, and the shadows seemed to stretch and move as if something was hiding just beyond the edge of my vision. I grabbed my phone and shone the light around the room. Nothing. But the whispering continued. I spent the next few days trying to ignore the sounds, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched. But it was impossible. The presence in the apartment was growing stronger. I could feel it. And every night, the whispering grew louder, the knocking more persistent. It felt like something was trying to get in or out. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Mr. Grayson, demanding answers. He came over the next morning, looking tired and worn, like he hadn't slept in days. "You found the door, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. There's a reason that door was sealed. Clara, she never left the apartment. She's still here. Mr. Grayson explained that after Clara disappeared, strange things started happening in the building. Tenants complained of noises, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Several people moved out, unable to handle the constant disturbances. Eventually, the building was sold, and Mr. Grayson inherited the problem. I've tried everything, he said, shaking his head. But she won't leave. I didn't want to believe him. Ghosts, spirits, it sounded insane. But I couldn't deny what I had experienced. Something was in the apartment with me, and it was getting stronger. That night, I made a decision. I had to open the door. I didn't care what was behind it. I needed to know. I found an old skeleton key at a local antique shop and hurried back to the apartment. As soon as I turned the key in the lock, the air around me grew colder and the whispers became deafening. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a small, dark room. It smelled musty, like it hadn't been opened in decades. And there, in the corner, was a figure, Clara. Her pale, translucent face turned toward me, her eyes hollow and dark. I froze, unable to move, as she slowly stood and took a step toward me. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears, drowning out my thoughts. I backed away, heart racing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She raised a hand, and suddenly the lights in the apartment flickered and went out. I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. When I looked up again, she was gone. The room was empty, but the whispers remained, swirling around me, never leaving me alone. I left the apartment that night, never to return. Clara's story may have ended in that apartment, but her presence